How do you define a saint? Would you have a real-life saint in your life? Would you know one if you met one on the street? One of the definitions that I came across this week is, a saint is a dead sinner, revised and edited. A saint is a dead sinner, revised and edited. I'm going to put that on the wall in my office, I think. That's from a 1906 book by Ambrose Bierce called The Cynic's Word Book. So welcome to All Saints Weekend. Ever since the 7th century, Christians throughout the world have celebrated this day, this weekend. It has been a tradition, a special day to remember those people whose histories stand out, those whom we call saints, and who have been officially declared saints by the church. It is unusual, I think, for most of us to use the word saint, except in some very casual and sometimes sarcastic way. But it's interesting that in all of Paul's letters, he begins those letters with these words: to all the saints in Ephesus, to all the saints in Corinth. Now you and I know that all those folks were not saints as we usually think of them. Paul would then go on in many cases to chew out those saints for their many faults. Our epistle for this morning is addressed to all the saints in Ephesus. All the saints in Ephesus. A rowdy bunch at the very least. He had chapters in his letter of all the things they were doing wrong. But they are called saints. Somewhere around the 7th century A.D. is when the church in its wisdom first set aside a day to recall those outstanding Christians, the ones who bear the label saint. And finally to declare a day for all the saints. All the saints. All those people, just like the ones that Paul wrote to in Ephesus and Corinth. All that he had some bone to pick with. When you and I use the term, we generally mean something far different from that motley crew in Ephesus. We say a saint is usually some figure noted for their great spirituality and also their great devotion and generosity. As a boy, as an acolyte, I grew up on Sunday mornings with the sun shining through windows dedicated to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that were behind the altar and chancel of my parish church. I once had a parishioner who was routinely referred to as a saint because of her sorry husband, a drunk. You hear things about how can she put up with him? She is really saint. Well, one day he had a heart attack and darn near died. And and when he recovered, he gave up drinking. I noticed that people did not refer to her as a saint after that. And 2 years later, she divorced him. So much for stoic determination. Now take the case of Mother Teresa. We all know Mother Teresa is one of the most recent declared as a saint by the Pope. During that preparation to determine whether she would be so declared, the commission that was appointed by the papacy began to read her diaries and letters. And what they discovered that for most of her life, she suffered the dark night of the soul. Her prayer life was often empty. She had doubts about her calling, and essentially, on occasion, doubted the existence of God Himself. And yet every day, 12, 15, 18 hours a day, she dealt with the sick, the dregs of life. The New York Times sent a reporter to do a story on her in Calcutta. He watched her at work. He watched her bathe a leper. And he commented to somebody standing next to him, "I wouldn't do that for $1 million." And Mother Teresa looked at him and said, "Neither would I." Saints. If sainthood isn't necessarily characterized by deep spirituality, then what are the characteristics of saintliness? I went back and looked over the years of people I have known whom others have called saintly. Flipped through books about saints and their characteristics. And for me, there are three characteristics of a saint. Saint, as I use the term, as I think it was intended to be used by the church on this All Saints weekend. First of all, there is, I think, a willingness to be with another person. A saint has the willingness to be with another person. In the Gospel for this morning, Luke recounts that Jesus had gone up on a mountain to pray for those whom He had called to be with Him. A crowd of people. And He addresses them as friends. Friends, let me tell you the good news. And He comes down off that mountain to the plains and says, friends, and the first thing out of His mouth is, blessed are you. Blessed are you. Do you get up in the morning and the first thing you think of how blessed you are? Blessed are you who are poor. Blessed are you who are hungry. Have you ever really been hungry? Not hungry for a steak. Hungry for a decent meal. Hungry for a living wage. Hungry for respect. Hungry for the pain to go away. We know something about being the blessed who are often hungry. Blessed are you who weep. Who do you weep for? Who do you weep for? But then, when he's through with his blessings, he says, you will be filled. You will laugh. You will be precious. These are the dregs of society that he is talking to. Peasants who have nothing. But they belong. That's it. They belong. You see, saints, beloved, are those who are in Jesus' community. Seems to me a second characteristic of a saint is that willingness to be a part of that community. That in that community you speak the truth in love. You care for one another in good times and bad. That you're willing to be with. I mentioned the wife who ended up divorcing her husband after he got sober. It's interesting, she couldn't not forgive the health, the sobriety. But she could tolerate the drinking. No. Saints are those who tell the truth, face the truth, but always speak in love. It's like the mother who says, he may be a brat, but he's my brat. The truth is spoken in love is the second characteristic of saints. And I think, thirdly, there is the willingness to forgive. The willingness to forgive. To face the truth honestly, but to leave room for forgiveness. Over the years, I have seen to it that every parish in which I have been associated had either an AA chapter or an Al-Anon chapter. Al-Anon meets here, if you were not aware of that. These groups are characterized by first and foremost honesty. If you're in an AA or an Al-Anon group and asked to introduce yourself, and you would say, my name is Don and I'm a drunk. There is that. Honestly facing who and what we are. But what happens next is individually, everybody in that group will welcome that individual. Will welcome their presence. It's an acknowledgement to some degree of forgiveness. It always begins with honest confession. That's why in our liturgy, at the beginning, there is always a form of confession. There is acceptance for the one who is confessed. In AA, that person will have every individual sitting in that room say, welcome. You see, we don't come here bearing the name, we do come here bearing the name that we received at our baptism. We come here having been declared as God's and Christ's own forever. We come here seeking forgiveness. And we get absolution. You see, if AA is for Alcoholics Anonymous, then this meeting is Sinners Anonymous. Think about it. In a few minutes, you and I will acknowledge our own sinfulness, and we will be given God's absolution. Somebody asked me about my profession, and I said I can sum it up pretty simply. I've been commissioned to tell people they are forgiven. It's the bottom line. That there's someone, a God, who loves you enough to forgive you. In a few minutes, you will sit at this table, kneel before this table, and receive spiritual food from that heavenly banquet. And then you'll be sent out. Sent out to be one of those saints. To be with. That's what you and I are called to do. It's what saints do. To be with. To be with your family. To be with your neighbor. Often to be with people you really don't like very well. But saints are those who are willing to be with. And as you go out to be with, go in peace to love and serve the Lord.